Welcome to Beyond Leading, the podcast that cuts through the noise to get real about leadership, team dynamics, personal growth, and the messy, brilliant reality of work, life, and everything in between. Each episode brings grounded insights, sharp truths, and honest conversations with experienced leaders and coaches as we explore what it really takes to lead well today. We don't deal in one-size-fits-all answers. We spark ideas, offer grounded perspectives, and create space for you to work out what fits your world. So let's get into it. In this episode, we're diving into a subject every leader and every team has to face, that of change management. Change is no longer a one-off event. It's become the constant backdrop of work life, whether it's new technology, shifting client expectations, or the rise of AI. The pace of disruption is only increasing. And here's the reality. Change doesn't usually fail because of strategy. It fails because of people. Teams experience uncertainty, resistance, and even loss when things shift. And leaders need to understand the human side of change, that of building trust, creating hope, and providing clarity, if they want their teams not just to adapt, but to thrive. Joining me in this episode are Tiffany David and Graham Costa. Together, we'll explore the change curve, the leadership capabilities that make all the difference, and the question most organizations skip entirely. Are your people actually ready to change? Graham also shares a question he used to put to leaders before any change program, one that stopped most of them in their tracks. So Graham, Tiffany, a very warm welcome. I want to start with the following question. Why is change management more important now than it was 10 years ago?
Yeah, I'll jump in if I could. I am happy to be here again. It's always timely and relevant topics that we're discussing. And I think that this one is I just see it as this umbrella topic because it impacts so many elements of leadership and teams and organizations, and just kind of some community impacts as well. So I think that what we are experiencing now collectively is this rapid pace of change. Change has always been there, hasn't it? It's always been a staple of whatever we do. But the pace of change is, I think, dramatically faster now than what I have experienced in the past. And I'm hearing that from others. But also the impact of the change is more widespread instead of sort of ripples. And this is obviously the way that we're more connected now in all these different areas. So the impact, the ripple effect of the change, and also the nuances of the change, that we have so much technology, AI, the way we work, players involved, going deep into organizations. All of those are just add this level of complexity. So I think it's the pace, the scope, and the complexity of change that is absolutely becoming more important now than ever before to understand what's going on.
Thanks, Tiffany. I think it's always been important, this aspect of change, but things that, and I was just thinking as you were talking, if we were recording this 10, 15 years ago, would we still be saying the similar things? We wouldn't mention AI, but I think we would be saying some of the things that you've already said. And I just think it's been heightened at the moment because of all the uncertainties and stuff that's going on in the world. And the amount of turmoil, for want of a better word, that's going on in the world. And you could argue maybe we did have that 10, 15 years ago. I think it's heightened now. So yeah, I think it's always been important. It's just more on the radar now. I think is my take.
But I do wonder, taking AI aside and technology for a moment, there was an interesting report from, I think it was McKinsey a number of months back, and it said 10, 15 years ago, your average leader was probably working on about 5 big projects at one time. But now it's suggested that's doubled, and even a little, add even more to that. But there's one thing I see just with some of my clients, because I hear they're working on so much, they're doing so much, but then I question why. Why are you doing so much? Because it's part of this busyness from leaders and all this stuff that's going on. Is this self-inflicted or is this actually necessary? Because sometimes I think some of the stuff we're doing isn't necessary. Now, I know that doesn't relate to change management per se, but again, it's this so much happening is the perception.
But a lot of that, though, if you just go back in history. So whenever I'm trying to think, when should I go back? In the 80s, 90s, when there was a lot of churn, a lot of people were losing their jobs, etc., etc. If you're busy, then I'm less likely to lose my job because people realise, we can't possibly get rid of this person because he's so damn busy, or she. And I think there's a lot of that that's coming around, and we know companies are cutting back. There's enough of it you read in the press almost daily about different things, and with the AI thing as well. So are people taking on more or being busier? They may not be being, just because it's showing that they're sort of, you can't possibly get rid of me. I think that's a natural human thing which would go on. Particularly now with redundancies. Yeah. And the way, particularly the UK economy is at the minute, recruitment at a very low level. It's funny. Just before we came onto this podcast recording, there was an article on the news that just came on where I don't know anymore, but the headline was what caught me: is AI the latest .com bubble? I.e., everyone's talking about it, and just like everyone was talking about the .com, and it's nowhere near as impactful as they say. So you've got all these people running around, all these organizations who are using it as a good excuse. Oh, we need to make it more efficient. Oh, well, AI is now allowing us to do that, which for some companies it may be true. I think for a lot of them who are using it, I think it's just an excuse. That's controversial, isn't it? But I just think there is that thing. You will make yourself busy, so you'll take on those, more projects, etc. And that McKinsey thing, the question that I've got with that. Yeah, okay. If people were on average dealing with 5 large projects, they don't define what large is. And now they're dealing with many more. Well, what's large? What does that mean? Are the more projects they're dealing with now the same size as those 5, or what? And obviously we don't know. That's not to dispute the data, but I think it just raises other questions. And as coaches, what a surprise! It raises more questions. But does that not link to, because I think a key issue with change, and I'm thinking from a staff, team member's perspective, because what we've talked about now is actually a lot of fear. I mean, AI, fear is, will I still have my job at the end? Is my job being replaced? With the economy, fear, companies are trying to become much more maybe efficient. There's talk about, how we need to streamline processes, we need to relook at governance. All this is going on, number one, for profitability, to keep up with the competition. But the staff are seeing this as fear. Well, what happens to me? And if communication from leaders, which is one area I see is generally lacking, we make those interpretations and assumptions about what might be going on or what isn't going on. And then we go into the state of any change, it must be bad. I tend to look at it from the lens of focus. It's a great book. You were bringing up the McKinsey study, and in Cal Newport's book called Slow Productivity, he talks about the project avalanche, right, that we're experiencing and how it's grown. And he makes a good point that I really agree with, in that we need to come back to the ability to focus. We are, because of drinking from the fire hose with all these changes and so on, this ability to sort of funnel this down and make mindful decisions about what am I focusing on.
And then you can really get into those ideas of quality over quantity, which is incredibly important. And you can come back to what are my active projects and what are my waiting projects. And when that's well communicated throughout your team and your organization, and this, I am talking about sort of leadership and above, right? But there's this element of, right, I know that I can focus. I have this time to work on this project, maybe one project a day, and that's what I'm going to work on. And it could change during the day, but you have to have a distraction-free, and by distraction-free, I truly mean that there's got to be some mindful preparation with that. Distraction-free chunks of time, perhaps not the whole day. And also, just kind of this coming back to, what am I focusing on? Where is my best work? And that has to involve focus. It has to involve focus. And so, just kind of looking historically at what some breakthroughs have come as a result of, it is that deep productivity. It is absolutely that distraction free. So I suppose what I'm saying is this idea of going from 5 projects to 15 or 20 is not serving us. We really need to think about what is the root cause? What are we trying to achieve? What's our successful outcome? And then sort of define the projects from there, and what's active and what's waiting.
I think there'd be some people though, Tiffany, would be actually saying, well, we've done all that and we still need 15 projects. I don't think that takes away from the point that you were making. Yeah, but okay, just focus on one at a time. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. So, and I think that's a really good idea in terms of, just focus that time. I've got 15 projects. Okay, fine. But today I'm just going to deal on this one. Tomorrow I'm going to do that one. And
that's a really good point, Graham, because that way we're not saying no. And I think a lot of times, especially working in a team, people will say, this is our team's project. This is the most important, right? There's sort of a siloed perspective sometimes, but you're absolutely right. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying, what now? And then because, and this is sort of back to this idea of change management and the cadence, we need to be fluid. So as we get one project done well, then we can learn from that, right? And we're always this continuous learning. What's next? What's more fluid? And those other waiting projects might very well change as we start to tick off the projects on our list as the priority moves down the chain. Yeah, good point.
Just on that point, because I think that's a key point for leaders. If we look at what the change curve consists of, now the version I'm explaining here is the Kubler-Ross model. And it suggested when any change, typically we start with that shock and denial. Then we might get anger. We then move into resistance. We then move into, exploring what this change actually means. And then, if we're managing it right, we get acceptance and commitment from staff. So thinking back to what you said, with focus, is that the key skill for leaders to take on board? Because the problem we see if we go through the change curve is that many leaders are not aware of all the stages their team might well be going through. Exactly.
And I think that last point, Alec, is so incredibly important because if I could back up just before the Kubler-Ross Kubler-Ross, you might have an opportunity to get people to have sort of, skin in the game, we call it. Is everybody feeling like they have a voice? Because nobody likes when change happens to them, but we're quite happy to announce when change is initiated by us. And I'm just taking that example of, if somebody says, you need to exercise, 2 hours a day to achieve your fitness goals. And this is what you need to do, blah, blah, blah. That's quite different. That's change happening to me. Whereas if I say, I'm going to run a marathon and I want your support, that's coming from me. And I think that you can get it, you can have a different sort of change management acceptance phase model when you have voices feeling heard, when you have people saying, actually, I'm part of this change. This is what it means to me.
Yes, I agree. The thing that's coming to my mind, there's a guy called, and I'm trying to remember, there were two of them, and I can only remember one of them, but Steve Rolnick. So Steve Rolnick I came across him when he was in a psychological point of view. He did a lot of work working with people with dependencies. I think there's a lot of this written on the internet or from him, Steve Rolnick, Professor Steve Rolnick, I believe, where he was going on about talking about if he had somebody with a drugs or an alcohol problem coming to see him, on day one, he wouldn't talk about trying to change them because they had no desire to change. So if I just talk it, and forgive the example in case people who are listening to this are affected in some way or whatever. If somebody's got an a drink problem, so you drink, yes, of course I drink, we all have a drink, don't we? Yeah. And if you ask them what are the benefits of drinking, they will list out loads of positives. And what's the downside of drinking? Well, sometimes I wake up with a bit of a hangover, and that's it. So then they're not ready to change or to take anything. They're in a state of unreadiness. Then what he does over time, and I think this is, I will make the relevance back to the corporate world. He then starts talking to them. You talk about that thing about that's, sometimes you wake up with a headache. What does that mean? What's the worst headache you've had? And what he starts trying to do is then talking to them where they start questioning, well, do you know what? Instead of having 10 pints a night, maybe I should only have like 6 instead or whatever. Because, yes, they start recognizing that the positive or the positive reasons for drinking, they're the negatives. And actually, are they good? And then you keep on doing. So they reach a case of, I think he was calling uncertainty or ambivalence or whatever. And then it gets to the final stage where you keep on pushing those, where they all of a sudden say, I've got to change. Yep, I've got to do this. And he argues that actually a lot of change management in organizations will fail simply because of the fact that you haven't understood that element. You're trying to go, well, here's a solution. And the person's saying, well, I don't have a problem. And I think that is the point. So the change management stuff that I've worked with in organizations over the years, what I try being the operative word, is get them that whole period of first. I'm not talking about solutions. I'm just getting them to understand, to admit, that they have a problem. So you will hear people with the drink thing. I am an alcoholic. I forgot what the word he used, but like self-affirming statements. And it's quite, if you take some relatively famous, when I was dealing with this, so football, so in the English side of soccer or whatever, there was an ex-England captain, Tony Adams, who played for Arsenal and England, and even today, he will say, I am an alcoholic, and doesn't drink because he went there. If you take the other most famous person, well, very famous alcoholic in this case, Paul Gascoigne, and I always remember Paul Gascoigne is such a tragic sense, fabulous footballer, but when he came out of the Priory, and they said, you're not going to have a drink again then, Paul, are you? And he went, well, yeah, probably. And you could see then, you think, and it's not going to last, and it didn't. So this whole thing, so a lot of the solutions or things he was getting at the Priory again was, you could argue, was a bit of a waste of time. Now going back into the corporate world, how much, when we all know that a lot of change doesn't, I've forgotten what the percentages are, the amount of change projects that never come to fruition. I'm not sure enough time is being spent, and so the leaders, come back to your point, Alec, in terms of the essence, the communication, but it's getting people to be dissatisfied with their present state, and that's the link between the psychologist and where I think where organisations need to look. How do you make people unsure or dissatisfied with their present state?
But is that not linked to clarity of direction? Because the other problem we see in some teams, when you ask them, well, what's the strategy of your department? Where are you going? That information isn't always given from the top. And I'm just thinking about, both things you've been talking about there. And I'm thinking, right, okay, what are the leadership skills or capabilities we need for change? Well, like number one, we need clarity of direction. Communication has been mentioned a few times. But actually, linking back to your point, Graham, empathy, resilience, inclusion, they're the other things that kind of came up from that story you were saying as well.
Yeah, yes. One of the things that I used to take when I did a lot of change management stuff in the day or whatever, when I was before, well, in the final pitch, I'd take people through these boards through the readiness to change. And at the end of it, I used to say, they always used to nod and say, okay, can you think of the 5 people in the organization today that you could not do without? And when I said, okay, have you got them? Yes, I've got them in my head. Right, fine. As a result of the change program that we're going to help you with, they want to resign. They leave. What do you think of that change program that we're helping you put together? And the ones, and there were a number who went, oh, well, actually, I'm not sure. Oh, I'm not sure. And I said, fine, I don't want to work with you because this is going to fail. And the ones who actually said, well, as a result of the change, they don't want to work here and actually it's not right for them, then that's what we've got to do. And we just need to move on. Right, okay, I'll work with you. But it was really quite harsh, but actually saying, well, why am I going to work with you when we know that this isn't going to work? So I sort of use that framework as something to actually get them to understand. And that question, as I said, think of your 5 best people and they leave as a result. How do you feel? And I'm sure there's a number of people listening to this who do that and think, oh, we couldn't possibly. Well, okay, fine. Then you're not ready to change.
Yeah.
Brilliant point.
Yeah, that's a great exercise. I like that. There's nuances to it, I mean, I think that I'm just thinking about it and some of my clients, and I think that they would say, gosh, these are people that I trust and rely on. If they are not part of this change, I would then question my reason and if the change is right, which I think is good. That's that dialogue. Have that first. And I think that's what that question does, is it pushes back to say, what change are you hoping to implement and what's your end outcome? I think that's anything that encourages people to ask the question, leadership especially, that's driving the change, to say, in my pocket, when I meet with everybody that's important to this change that will be implementing it, when they ask, what's in it for me? I know what the answer is. Because everybody will ask that question, even if they phrase it differently. What's in it for me? Is my job going to be easier? Are we going to gain efficiencies? Well, then that opened up to job scope. What is it that is most important that I will be getting? Is it a bonus? Is it, rev share, whatever? People want to know that. So it would be a really good sort of in your pocket answer to have that. What's in it for me?
But does that not also push there's a kind of phrase called the strategic moment, where you give that space to actually talk about the change and why and what it means for me. But part of that space you're giving is for new ideas to come up. And if I give you an example of this, one of the interesting conversations I seem to have with clients about AI, and we're doing a lot on AI because we're trying to make the businesses more efficient particularly because of the economy at the moment. But there's a perception that, well, AI gets rid of jobs and that's it. And I turn it around and say, okay, yes, it could do that, but let's look at the bigger picture, because I want to look at hope, right? Well, where are we going? How can we make this even better? And I say to them, with AI coming in, does some of your job, what does that then free you up to do that you've never been able to do before? And I wonder what I'm probably getting to here. That strategic moment is actually about, why don't we have a creative moment? Probably that's a better word, to think, right, this change is coming. We have to do it. But how can we make it even better? How can we do something we've not even thought of now and give the space for that, if that makes sense?
Yeah. That.
Go on, Tiffany, go on.
Sorry. No, I mean, I think we were talking about PQ the other day, and there's just a tie-in with what you just said, is that, fear is absolutely rampant. We opened with that, didn't we? Like, this is a rampant thing. If we can quiet the fear, not completely eradicate it, but if we can quiet that by saying, okay, those are some possibilities that I see. I might lose my job. I might not be able to handle AI, this new AI world, blah, blah, blah. This is moving too fast. All of those, just squash those fears for a moment, put them in the corner, and then look at the other possibilities. What is the gift and opportunity? And then we come back to the knowledge, power, and inspiration that could be involved in this change. What knowledge might we gain? What power might we strengthen? What inspiration in terms of a creative response might we be faced with? And then that question, of course, what am I not seeing? Asking your team, this is my sort of idea for change, blah, blah, blah. What am I not seeing? Sit on it, think about it, come back with ideas. I think that is always going to be the invitation, to look at the possibilities. Yeah.
So are we saying then, because the one thing we haven't talked about, and maybe this is now key, is the culture of the team. And if we have positivity in that team culture, and we ingrain just the things you've mentioned there, Tiffany, is that not another part that makes change simpler? Because the culture is to look ahead, to be positive, to have hope. Everything we do has meaning. We explain the change, why it changes, why it matters to them personally, not even just the business. But maybe it's the tone of what we're doing, what we change.
I think it could be all of that, but I think there's a reality as well that, not everybody's going to agree with the change that you're putting in. So I think it's having that it goes back to a lack of fear, that somebody can put their hand up and say, this ain't for me. Thanks ever so much. Good luck. This isn't for me. And it's, and we talk about it, I suppose, in our roles. We have almost like, the teams we deal with, we have the utopian team, don't we? It's brilliant in every single way. And we know damn well that doesn't actually exist. I think it could be incredibly helpful for some leaders who have got dysfunctional teams, not by design, but it's just getting people to feel comfortable to actually open up, or that reflective question that you were asking, Tim. Yeah, go away and think what can come back up, and we don't know what's going to come out of it. I'm sure when the Industrial Revolution took place all those years ago, and all those farm people working on the farm were losing their job, did they all sit down and say, "Oh, let's think of the opportunity"? No, but life it sort of moves on. And I know that's not what we're talking about here in mass societal things, but for individual teams, I think it could be quite interesting.
Does that not then link to skills agility as maybe another priority for teams now? Because I know we keep talking about AI, but it is the big thing at the moment. As part of change management, is skills agility not actually part of what every team needs to be focused on?
Well,
because I don't see enough of skills development in many teams, particularly non-technical skills. Technical skills, yes. And if you think of finance and accounting, they have to do that because of regulation. But typically, it's non-technical skills that lack. And a great example of this is in the legal sector at the moment. AI is coming, and particularly the larger law firms are deploying a lot more AI. But it's starting to take more of the lawyer's job per se. The big question is, right, so what is this now freeing up the lawyer to do? And it's actually about more business development. It's about more client relationships. They're going to have to be much more people orientated. But typically that's not a skill they've been taught to do, because they just typically work on client documents and it's all very transactional. But now we're saying, well, actually the future lawyer of 2030, well, you've got to be much more people focused. So again, this is linking back to, regardless if change is happening or not, again, to make it easier if change has to happen, we've got skills agility as part of that continual flow. It's always happening in that team. And it prepares us for the unknown, for the future.
When you were talking about positivity a moment ago, there's a lot of buzz right now about toxic positivity, and, people sort of shy away from, having to put the smile on and having to say, yes, I like this, and I think what I'd like to substitute for positivity is maybe resilience. And that's got that a flavor of adaptability in it. And you're right. This is, I think we should say AI is part of what we're dealing with, but everything is moving in such a swirl that we have to have the skill set that comes with resilience. And that is knowing how to pivot, knowing how to shift, being open to learning, new skill sets, new ways of doing business. That's exactly what you're talking about. And I think that that's absolutely in line with sort of, we've experienced linear change. We know, you're talking about the Industrial Revolution, there are sort of like, you can build a timeline, and people have, about this happened, this, here we are in this what do they call it? Stage 2 of information revolution. I think it's something like that. I might be getting it wrong, but it's no longer linear. It's scattershot. I would argue that we are no longer on this like continuum. We actually have change coming from all different sorts of directions. So we have to understand the human element, the human energy element, because otherwise, and I'm preaching to the choir here, we've got a burnout issue on our hands. People cannot split their brains, their focus, so we have to take the human energy component as well as the adaptability to build this resilience model.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because as things change, the actual technical skills, for want of a better expression, are the ones we can't predict what they're going to do. We don't know. But these things like the resilience, I'm just thinking, I was going to use positivity, but I used your word there. I think that's probably quite true, actually. But some of those skills, or those characteristics, I guess, are the things that we can and we should be putting to allow people to have that diversity, so they're not so worried about it, because I can pick it all up, and a lot of this isn't rocket science. So I remember speaking to years ago the guy at TGI Fridays. That's all. Which, okay, it's going different ways. And they sort of said, well, it's about recruitment, and he said, I just recruit for character, because I can teach them everything they need to know, but I can't teach their character. And that's why they used to do a certain thing. So all the people that, going off slight tangent, but one of the things they used to do on all of their recruitment is they just stop now and say, Tiffany, sing us a song now. And the people who couldn't stand up and sing a song, right, wrong character, don't want them. And it wasn't quite as blunt as that, but generally that was what it was. We wanted a certain personality, a certain character.
All they need to know is how to sing Happy Birthday. We know that at TGI.
Well, exactly. Well, that's the easy one to do. Yeah, you start singing MacArthur's Park or something. Oh my god! But I think it is that thing. It's a greater demand nowadays, perhaps, to actually focus on those the characteristics, the characters. It's not about the technical things. Now, I know that might be, and AI, you talked about the legal sense, which I don't know as well as obviously you do, Alec, in that. But yeah, if AI is doing this, so you're putting everything in, so what's the case, and it's bringing all those bits and pieces. Yeah, it is about that people element, isn't it? The interpretation of that, and how do I describe that, and how do I, how am I best presenting that back, etc. That's my take anyway on that particular aspect. But as you said, I think we are all singing from the same hymn sheet in that sense.
But I'm just thinking back to Tiffany's point, though. You talked about burnout, and I think that well-being is a really important part of this. And I think maybe the other thing we've got to concentrate on as a leader is because we talk about the change that's happening, and to a lot of people, this is massive change. So maybe part of that communication is to start breaking it down into manageable stages with milestones or goals or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then we've got, probably coming back to emotional intelligence here, just keeping an eye on the team, making sure that burnout is not coming, we haven't got fatigue, and supporting them, taking their hand at every step here.
Well, here's the good news. We've done it. I just would like to point back to in COVID, everybody had to learn how to work remotely. Well, I say everybody, and forgive me, I mean mostly knowledge workers, but we had to learn how to work remotely. I just wish I had stock in Zoom at that point. Because do you remember, we would go on, on Monday morning, and people would always be apologizing because Zoom had the latest update. Because every single week, if not more often, Zoom was updating their platform and blah, blah, blah. And, but we also had to learn to work with this remote or hybrid sort of model. And I think that the people who did it well, the organizations that did it well and leaders chunked it out. And they said, we just want to check on you, right? We want to check, how has this been? Do you need to, not have back-to-back meetings? When are you eating? When are you taking a break? That's really important. So I feel like that is a great example of, actually, we've done this before on a massive global scale. We know what this looks like. And to your point, Alec, we did it just that. We made it into digestible chunks, and we checked in. And, I think that that's really something to look at as sort of, we've walked through this before, massively.
Okay, so to sum up, key points for our leaders to take away from this.
I've got something that was the Kugler and Ross thing, the shock, anger, rejection, acceptance. I used to put an H on the end, so instead of SARA, the American way, put SARA on it, and the H meaning help. So what help do you need at each of those stages? At shock, anger, rejection, acceptance, what help do you need at each of those particular things? And I think that's one of the aspects a roundabout summary to the leaders who are listening to this is, don't be worried about asking for help. You're not supposed to know everything.
I would build on that. Thank you, Graham. I would build on that and say, you don't know everything, and actually it's good for you to realize and communicate that you don't know everything. You can absolutely be a visionary, and you can be an impact catalyst, but the more you involve people in the change, the more success you'll have, the more buy-in you'll have, and I believe the more accountability, impact of your check-ins will be that way as well. So, again, not to oversimplify it, but I think effective communication with the human lens is key to any change management.
I think I would add to that. I think that leads on to, it's all about support structures. That I think coaching even comes into this as well for leaders to coach their staff. But I think for me, there's quick wins. Because sometimes actually we get some quick, early visible wins that kind of builds momentum and actually helps relieve some fear and some anxiety. But I think for me, the key thing is to build a change-ready culture in your team. I think if we can do that at the beginning and we adapt our leadership according to what's happening, that's the other thing I would certainly recommend.
And that's the resiliency muscle. Build that resiliency muscle. It's not a light switch. That's such a good point. You need to have sort of experiments to start building those muscles, because that's truly what it is. Culture ready environment. Love that. It's good.
Great. Tiffany and Graham, thank you very much. And until next time.
Thanks,
you.
Alex.
Thank you for listening to Beyond Leading. If this episode was useful, follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone who'd appreciate it. And if you've got a minute, a quick rating or review really helps more people find the show.